Thanks for coming, everybody. This is an outreach program of the Hop and John Old-Time and Bluegrass Fiddlers Convention next weekend. There's some information and some snacks on the table back there. And I just wanted to say thank you to the Old-Time Herald and to Gail and to Alice. When we first started talking about having a Fiddlers Convention in Chatham County, Gail was very instrumental in making that happen. The Old-Time Herald sponsored us for a few years, and Alice appeared numerous times, just out of the goodness of her heart a few times. And just thanks to them, the Old-Time Herald, and to the North Carolina Arts Council, who is also a sponsor of tonight's event.
Ooh. I got it. Okay, so this is Gail right here. Gail Gillespie. And I'm Alice Gerrard, and the subject, I guess, tonight was the Old-Time Herald, and when she asked us if we'd talk about the Old-Time Herald, it seemed like that might be a good thing to do, so. As usual, I've probably overthought this whole thing, but I thought, so I'm going to start because I started the Old-Time Herald back in 1987. I was living in Galax, Virginia at the time, and a bunch of us were sitting around. I lived in this little shack on the outside of town, and people would come by to spend the weekend or play music and stuff, and we'd be sitting around talking. We were talking about the future of traditional music and where it was going, and one thing and another, and somebody said, you know, there should be a magazine for old-time music. And it really started something in my brain, because I lived in Washington, D.C. in the 60s and was part of the beginning of the magazine Bluegrass Unlimited, which some of you may have heard of. It's a magazine that was started by Pete Kuykendall, who was a musician, and I remember the first meeting sort of talking about what the purpose of Bluegrass Unlimited would be. And I think the idea was to create a forum for bluegrass music, because at that point there was no real magazine that did record reviews and said where people are playing, so-and-so's coming to town, or offered, you know, letters to the editor where people could air thoughts, and I realized how much that magazine had created a kind of a community for bluegrass music, where people could hear about what other musicians were doing, where they were playing, and recordings could get reviewed. And this is the first issue of Bluegrass Unlimited. It's a Xerox, July 1966. And then it graduated to that. That was a later incarnation. That's Carter Stanley on the cover of the Stanley Brothers. And then eventually it got to sort of a slick 4-color cover, and it proceeded to be that kind of magazine. And so I was thinking in my head when we were sitting in Galax and talking about all this, that I would like to maybe start a magazine. And it was one of those ideas, you know, you get an idea and you go to bed and you can't sleep and you think about it and you wake up and then you're thinking about it. And it just seemed like such a great idea to start a magazine. And I didn't know anything about starting a magazine. I knew one thing, and that was that I wanted it to be slick. I didn't want it to be like the mimeograph thing. And I didn't want it to be a fanzine. I wanted it to, you know, have reviews that help define the state of the art and that sort of thing. And so this is the proposed introduction to the first issue, which says, this is the first issue of a new magazine to be devoted to the support, promotion, and encouragement of old-time music. The intent is to provide a vehicle for bringing together ideas, giving voice to old-time musicians and fans, to publish articles of interest, historical and contemporary, and to review old-time music recordings and tapes. We will pay attention to record companies, festivals, radio, etc., which support and present old-time music in a way that is consistent with the respect that it deserves. And then, recognizing that there are many forms of old-time music in this country, the myriad ethnic forms, Cajun, Tex-Mex, etc., we feel that our purpose will be better served in our vision less fragmented and primarily focusing on the genre of old-time music, which has its roots in southeastern old-time fiddle, banjo, and vocal music. And then the first issue will contain, and then it lists a bunch of people who contributed to the very first issue, an article on Bruce Green, an old-time fiddler from Burnsville, North Carolina, the Slate Mountain Ramblers. And so those were the ideas. And but I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about putting out a magazine. And so I started calling people. I knew people to call. So I called Charles Wolfe, who was an old friend from Missouri. He was working at down in Murfreesboro at the time. He's a writer. He's written books on Grandpa Jones, Lefty Frizzell, the Carter family. He's a country music scholar, and he was in the English department at MTSU at Murfreesboro. And he was great. He passed away several years ago. He was so helpful. And I called Dave Freeman, who was a record collector who started County Records. And he lived up around Roanoke, Virginia. He was originally from New York, and he fell in love with Southern string band music. Started County Records in 1963, and eventually moved to Floyd, Virginia, and opened up County Sales there. It was a mail order retail company. Then there was Bobby Patterson, who lived in Galax. He was the founder and owner of Heritage Records, which was a local record company from Galax. And Bobby, he had recorded a lot of local music. His father was an old-time fiddle player, and he himself played banjo and guitar. And he had a little shop just outside of Galax that sold cake decorations and recordings. And
still do.
I know. So, and he let us. He let me have a room in the basement of his shop for our office. So he had an old desk. We put an old desk down there, and we made an agreement with the Moose Lodge in Galax, who ran the Old Time Fiddlers convention there every August, and they let us set up a booth they would let us set up a booth at the Old Time Fiddlers convention, which happened in August. And so this was like, so I had this idea. And then Hillary Durham, who was a music friend of mine, and Brad Leftwich and his wife Linda Higginbotham, each of us threw in $2,000. So we had about $6,000. And we just plowed ahead. And these people gave us lots of advice. Later on, as we became more aware of how organizations operate and stuff like this, somebody said, you should have gotten somebody who knew something about finances and this kind. But my feeling is, if we had, they would have said something like, well, you're going to need at least $30,000, to get started. And we never would have, done it. But this way, we just kind of plowed ahead. Dave Freeman found this printer for us up around Roanoke, Virginia, Dooley Printing. They mostly did like school menus and restaurant menus and napkins. They were just a local printer, but they took on the job of printing the Old-Time Herald, and it was great. So by August of 1987, about 6 months after the idea started percolating, we had the first issue out, which was this. Fall 1987, the Slate Mountain Ramblers.
Over on the table, when I was editor, it was the 20th anniversary, and that's the send-up of the Slate Mountain Ramblers posed in front of the Freeze
Yeah.
Theater. So
Freeze, Virginia.
we redid it for the 20th anniversary.
Freeze or fries, depending on the time of year. So, and we set up a booth at the Galax Fiddlers Convention. And there we are.
I remember that banner.
Evelyn Farmer sitting there. She's a singer. There's Dale Morris and Evelyn Farmer in the first issue of the Old-Time Herald. Get your copy here. That's Lachlan Shaw playing the fiddle with A.C. Overton there on the right. This is a little bit later. You see there are several issues there, but still the same. And there's Lachlan's wife and A.C.'s wife, and I don't know who that other person is, but they were sitting around.
Ava and Mary Lily.
Yeah. And then there's Enoch Rutherford. And he was a banjo player from around Galax, Independence, Virginia. And he was posing by the Uncle Herald. We had a column called Ask Uncle Harold. It was supposed to be sort of an advice column. And questions, if people had questions.
And it was a secret identity.
Yeah, nobody knew who Uncle Harold was. So then it became very clear. Well, let's see, what's the next picture? So we had, these were our mailing lists cards. And it became real clear that we were going to need a computer. That it wasn't going to be, we weren't going to be writing out labels or typing them out. I mean, I barely knew how to use an electric typewriter at that time. So I got some advice from Patrick Skye, if you know who Pat Skye is. He plays the Julian pipes and lived around here for a while. His wife played Irish fiddle. And he suggested that I get an Atari computer because they had a good mailing list program. So I don't know if any of you guys. So I did. We sent away for one. We got one. It came in the mail. And then I spent like days and days sitting there with the manual and just kind of trying to figure out, you know, Bobby said he could hear me cussing down the basement. But fortunately, there was somebody in Chapel Hill, Amy Jones.
Then Carl Jones' wife.
Carl Jones's wife at the time, who was a Commodore person, and she knew a lot about Ataris and Commodores and things like that. So I would load the computer into the car, drive it down to Chapel Hill. She lived on 86, and we'd unload it, take it into her house. She'd sort of set up some stuff and show me stuff to do, and I'd take it back to Galax and put it back up. And that's how we operated for a while. And nobody had computers at that time in Galax. There was just nobody. So we were doing this all by hand. Well, someplace along the way, we, so we would get copy. This was a subscription. We finally made a flyer that was a subscription flyer. But the process was copy would come in, people would write stuff, type it, we'd get it. I don't think we had a word processor on the computer at this point, so it was typing. Then I'd go through it, and Brad Leftwich, who was an editor at the place where he worked, he edited the school alumni magazine or something. So he knew about editing, so he told me all this stuff to do. He told me about the little marks that you make and everything. So I'd go through, and I'd mark up the copy. We'd drive it up to Salem, Virginia. Rowena, who worked there at Dooley, would take it all, and she would typeset it, and then at some point I'd drive back up there and look through all the typeset copy and see if there were mistakes and kind of correct it. And at some point then they'd print it up and the magazine would come back. So here's the copy. You see the marks. Old-Time Music in the Philadelphia Area by Keith Brand. And then these are the photographs that Dooley would take of the magazine. And this is like copy that was laid out. And then it would come back to us as magazines. And at some point, we went to second-class mail from third-class mail. It's a long time ago. But the Woodlawn Post Office, it's outside of Galax, between Galax and Hillsville, just off of Highway 58. It's this teeny little post office, and we'd be bringing these bags of magazines over there. Clarence Davis was the postmaster there. He was the only person working there. And every time we'd come in the door, I was just talking with Bobby Patterson about it the other day, he says, his eyes would just kind of roll back in his head, and he would like, oh no, here they come again. Because he didn't really know what he was doing as far as second-class mail either. So, but we all worked it out together, and with patience, got the magazine out. And so at some point, I thought, well, maybe it'd be a good idea to get nonprofit status because the mailing would be cheaper. And so we had a friend who was a lawyer in Delaware. And
Shell.
Yeah, Shell. And he applied for nonprofit status, so we got nonprofit status. I mean, I had no clue what I was doing. Just thought, nonprofit, that'd be a good thing to do. We're not making any money. And
We qualify.
and the mailing will be cheaper. So we got our 501c3 status, and we started trying to get more subscribers. That was a constant battle. This is a letter from Garrison Keeler that says, Dear Alice, I'd be happy to be one of your benefactors, and I'm enclosing a check, a sort of immediate response before I go to Denmark for the summer, I think he ended, and would welcome further appeals for help and would be glad to do what I can in contacting others who might want to help. The Everlys, for example, meaning the Everly brothers. And Emmy Lou, hope you had a good summer, blah, blah. And then we got this nice letter from Ralph Rinsler, who was an old friend of mine, but at the time he was the assistant secretary at the Smithsonian Institution. So he says, he wrote us a letter of support. I write to offer vigorous support for the efforts of Alice Gerrard and the Old-Time Music Group who are engaged. But this was a little bit later. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So anyway, and then another letter from Garrison, vital cultural organization. I'm proud to serve as an advisory board member. So anyway, we were always trying to find ways of drawing people in. So one of the things we did was we got this idea for photo bonus. So we'd get pictures of people reading the Old-Time Herald, and it'd be somebody like Virgil and Mabel Anderson, who's not everybody in the world knows who they are, but
we do.
I'll just play you a little bit if I can figure out how to do it. Let's see, let me just do this, get this. No.
You want Green Ford Blues?
Yeah, but where is it? Here it is. But this is Virgil. Uh-oh, I forgot to bring my speaker. Dang it. Okay, so is there a way to make this louder?
On the 3rd day of October in 23, when I left my home, I was wild and free.
Where? Here? Oops, sorry. Where?
On the 3rd day of October in 23,
That's Virgil
I
Anderson.
left my home, I was wild and
Can we
free.
look at him while we're listening to it?
I I met my baby on my way. I took a little walk around the Green Ford Bend, and I knowed good and well some were cooking up then. I'd met a little girl called her Maybelline.
Was the photo bonus, it was on the back cover, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was just, there was nothing on the back cover at first. So this was a blank slate for something like this.
Come on, pretty baby, just say you'll be mine. We'll do that Tennessee shuffle along the old state line.
So that's Virgil Anderson. So we got people like him and Snuffy Jenkins and Pappy Sherrill. Fiddler, Pappy Sherrill, and banjo player Snuffy Jenkins. And I do have a little... You can barely hear it, but... Snuffy was a banjo picker and Pappy Sherrill was a fiddle player. So a little bit of that. And let's see. So then it was always a learning experience. I mean, I learned so much, and there were a lot of interesting messes that we got ourselves into. Like the time we published an obituary, big full-page obituary of I forget who it was now, but we misspelled the name of the person who had just died, which was bad. And then there was a really, I moved down to Durham in 1989, and just after that, while I was still in Galax, we sent out an appeal for money. Please give us money, we need money. You've been there before, I'm sure. And got this letter back. Let's see, enter full screen. Oops, won't do it. Let's see, Shift, Command F. From this guy, hi strangers, can y'all read it? My name is James Harold Jennings. Whoops. Pinnacle, North Carolina. I sent you a check on the day of February 24th, 89 for the Old-Time Herald, and I have never got the Old-Time Herald. The check has returned to me. The check has been cashed. On the back of the check, it says, and it's for deposit only, blah, 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 blah. On Thursday, April 6th, I got a notice from the Old-Time Herald music group trying to rip me out of more money. Get the Old-Time Herald to me or send my money back. I have got my check. It was cashed at the Dominion Bank, and you can bet I will keep the last notice you sent me to use against you. If WPAQ radio station works for people like you, I will turn them over to the FCC. I wish you to understand that I sent you a check, and I have never got the first one. How in the hell do you expect to get any contributions from people anyway, blah, blah. And you never send them the magazine. And there are many radio stations. I will go back to rock and roll music and the hell with the old time music. And so And I can something also, pick a guitar. If I wish to listen to old time music, I can pick my own guitar. The hell with WPAQ radio station. If they work for the Old-Time Herald Music Group, if I don't get what I paid for, you or nobody else will hear old time music again around my place. So let's rock and roll. The hell with old time music. Come on, baby. Come on, sugar, let's rock and roll.
Do you have the picture of him with his?
Later, yeah.
Okay.
So I was like, well, this is interesting. And so I called Pete Kuykendall just to get some, I said, what should I do with this thing? And he gave me this little talk about how customers always write, send him a bunch of magazines and a letter of apology. So I sent him a letter. It said, we received both your letters expressing your concern about not having received your Old-Time Herald. We checked our records, and indeed, we have your card on file and also on the computer. It lists your expiration date as blah, 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 blah. Sometimes things get mixed up at the post office, too, so I was suggesting you check there. Please find and close the spring issue of the Old-Time Herald. The next issue will be mailed out at the end of April, and you should be getting it toward the beginning of May. If you have further trouble, please let us know and check with your post office. There may be a problem at that end. We hope you don't go over entirely to rock and roll. How was that? That was nice. Okay, so then we get this letter back. Hi, folks. I am very happy now. On Wednesday, I got my first Old-Time Herald. I was very glad to get it. I wish to keep it coming. Now I can send you a contribution. Please remember me and keep the Old-Time Heralds coming, and let me know if I can get all the early copies. Let me know how much money to send to get the last year's copies. I'm sending my contribution of $100. So along with the check for $100, he had a little photograph of himself. And he was this little guy, and he had Bermuda shorts and a brightly colored shirt. Well, actually, that's him.
He's a famous outsider
So it turns out, so I went to visit him. I said, I'm going to go see this guy. So I found him. He was living in a school bus on the side of the road in Stokes County. He lived in one school bus and had all his art equipment in the other school bus, and he made these brightly colored hats. Crowns out of wood, and he made a lot of, but all that stuff there is stuff he's made. And while I was there visiting him, he has battery radio there, he had no electricity or anything. A Lincoln Continental drove up with some people from New York who were coming to see about getting his stuff to put in the exhibit in New York City. So he was James Harold Jennings, you can look him up. He committed suicide, I forget exactly when, but several years ago. But he was quite a character. And I have kicked myself ever since. I never bought a crown from him. So in 1989, I realized I needed more support than I was going to have living there. I needed people. We needed to get our act together, kind of. And so I decided to move to Durham, because I had friends here and I didn't want to leave. It was only 3 hours from Galax, so I could go back and forth a bit. And so I moved here, and the Sounds of the South was a conference that took place in 1989 here. It gathered together record collectors, folklorists, musicians, record producers, librarians, archivists, and traditional music lovers. It was celebrating the official opening of the Southern Folklife Collection with the John Edwards Memorial Collection at the library, Wilson Library at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And so I thought, well, let me have a meeting. There are going to be all these people there who know a lot more than I do. Let's have a meeting and get advice. So we called this meeting. And so the people who came, well, among other people, Pete Kuykendall was there, Archie Green, who is a folklorist, a labor activist. He is credited with winning congressional support for passage of the American Folklife Preservation Act of 1976, which established the American Folklife Center in the Library of Congress. And he was partly responsible for getting the John Edwards Memorial Foundation archives into UNC. George Holt, who at the time was head of the North Carolina Arts Council, he's now Director of Performing Arts and Film Programs at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Toni Russell, the guy with purple hair from England. He was a music scholar. He's written a lot of books and wrote a project that took him more than 20 years was the Country Music Records, a Discography, 1921 to 1942. Documents all country music recording sessions for that period of time. So there were a lot of really good people, and I don't think you were there, Gail. We were trying to think if you were or not, but
I was at the Sounds of the South Conference, but I think that they repeated it in the early 90s.
Oh,
and
okay.
that's when I also met Archie Green.
Yeah, so I was just saying, what should I do? We have this 501c3. Well, they said, they read me the Riot Act. You've got to get a board of directors together. You've put the cart before the horse, getting 501c3 without any sense of... So that started us on the road to actually formalizing the organization and giving it the organization a name, which was the Old-Time Music Group, Inc., and creating a mission statement which sort of read, Old-Time Music Group celebrates the love of old-time music. Old-time music, grassroots or homegrown music and dance, shares origins, influences, and musical characteristics with the roots music throughout America. Our magazine casts a wide net highlighting the Southeastern tradition while opening its pages to kindred and comparable traditions in new directions. It provides enlightening articles and in-depth reviews, opportunities for musical learning and sharing, and a forum for addressing the issues and questions that bear upon the field. Recognizing that in roots music, ideas and values of many kinds commingle, we strive to represent our interests democratically and to embody the best ideals of race, gender, and generational balance in a context of free and open discussion. So that was our first sort of formal mission statement. And we got, so at this point, it was in my house, the magazine. I had it upstairs, and there was a table there, and we were still using Dooley printers and sending the copy to them, and they would send it back. They'd send us these wax sheets, we'd wax them and lay them out on, it was incredible. Then we got an Apple computer. One of our board members worked for a company that would give us an in-kind sort of grant or something like this, and she managed to get enough money to get an Apple together, and then we got a small grant from the Arts Council to get somebody to show me how to use PageMaker. So somebody came over to the house and sat down with me, set up a template for the magazine, and showed me how to use PageMaker. So from then on, I was laying the magazine out on the computer. And I remember one time, one terrible time when I didn't back things up and lost the whole magazine and had to sort of start over again. But that was, so we had a board, we had meetings every now and then. There were constant discussions about how to raise money, how to increase the subscribership. We went to visit Cy Safransky, who started the Sun magazine over in Chapel Hill, and he showed us all about, he had real feng shui in his office. Boy, I'll tell you, it was really, so, but he was great. And we did a readership survey, which asked, questions, trying to sort of get a handle on what the readers wanted to hear and what they liked. And there were there was some conflict, you know, people weren't used to having their records, their tapes, their cassette tapes that they would make. Lots of people were making cassette tapes, you know, learn how to play 6 songs on the dulcimer and you make a tape and then you put it out. So there were a lot of people that were very not used to having their stuff reviewed. And so it became a bit problematic. You know, I never intended for it to be a fan magazine. I really wanted it to be, but it was very difficult. And reviewers got into a lot of trouble with people because it was a small world. And so, you know, somebody would review something, maybe say something wasn't so great about it or something, and then they see them at a fiddler's convention. And I remember one time a guy got, "How could you say that about my video?" Anyway, but it was interesting. So then we, at some point around 89 or 90, 1990 maybe, the Merle Fest had just gotten started up in Wilkesboro. B Towns and Doc Watson got together and started this festival. And the second year, they wanted to get some help with it. And so they came down to the Arts Council to see if they could get some help. And the Arts Council suggested that we help them with a traditional stage, that the Old-Time Music Group be the person. So we did. And we brought Phil Jameson in because he was writing the dance column. We had a dance column every issue in the Old-Time Herald too. I felt like that was really important to have dance represented. And so Phil came in with dance, and we started the traditional stage up at Merle Fest. And Phil got some buddies of his in, and they built the dance stage. So it was a removable dance stage. And so from then on, for the next like 20 years or something, we ran the traditional stage at Merle Fest, and it was they paid us a small amount of money to do that, and that was stressful, to say the least, but fun. And then, so that was kind of, before I turned it over to Gail, who took over the magazine in 2003, does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I've been wondering if you have any idea what the circulation numbers were over those first few years.
Well, it started very low, and it probably, I think the most it ever was around between 4,000 and 5,000, which is quite a bit for a small magazine. And that was at top. It's not that much now.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah.
It peaked that far
Yeah.
back? Wow.
Yeah. Well, we really worked trying to get subscribers. You know, we'd go to take flyers out and do bulk mailings and stuff like this. But I think it's just, it's hard to know exactly why, but I think there was a little bit of a feeling on the part that's more prevalent in old-time music than bluegrass music, that it's a participatory thing, and you don't think of yourself as a fan who's going to go buy product. You know, you want to go to the Fiddlers Convention. Why pay for a magazine that has an article about Bruce Molsky when you can just go see him at Mount Airy or whatever? But so I think there's a little of that going on, whereas bluegrass has a huge fan base. So I don't know. That's just my little thought. But it was always a bit of a struggle. We really tried to be very representative in what we covered in the Old-Time Herald, including newer faces, newer bands, younger bands, African American music. We did an article on Joan Odell Thompson from Mebane, North Carolina, and an article on the accounting, a big article on Etta Baker early on. So, and we really did try to represent gender and racial differences and talk about those things. Yeah, any other questions? All right, Gail?
Well,
Want the mic? I can
yeah.
sit back there.
Can you hear me through this one that's on my? Okay.
He can, but they might
Oh,
not be
but you
able-
can't. Should I have two mics?
Oh, wait.
Look out,
wait.
you're tied up. There wasn't any single event that connected my being a reader and a subscriber to being editor, except that I met Alice when she first moved to Durham. Of course, I had all the issues from the beginning and had started writing reviews in 1988, I think, and always contributed a little bit here and there. And we became music buddies, and we've played music together since 88, 89, somewhere in
Well, I
there.
knew you before I moved here too, because
And then I started doing there was a lot more, when Alice started, there was a lot of volunteering, and people were in a different stage of their lives, and it was possible to just drop by and work for 6 hours. And people just did it because they wanted to. I really enjoyed being a part of it and enjoyed seeing how magazine worked, and I loved looking through those cards and knowing 90% of the people and seeing them. And at some point, I guess we made a cassette with, remember cassettes? with our friend Sharon Sandemersky, who was Sharon Poss with the Fuzzy Mountain String Band. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, a band with Alice and Sharon. And we played around a little bit and made our, it was a digital cassette too. We were ahead of the game. We used to. Herald Angel Band. And then later on I served on the board and got the feeling for what that was like. And at the time, I think Art Menius, do you all know Art Menius? He's a wonderful kind of a raconteur and MC. But when he is seated, he has an imaginary rocking chair. And he would sit there and he would say these really tough things to the board members. Basically, we've got to get more subscribers. It was always, the bottom line was more, and there was usually like a little lecture on how we need to go forth and each have a task and report back. And we had regular board meetings that were quarterly, and people took it seriously. There was a treasurer, but anyway, so I served on that, and that felt good too, to be part of this. And but in the meantime, I was in graduate school, and I wasn't able to do much more than occasional, we'd play music together. And but after I finally, I was a professional student, and finally finished my doctorate in '98, and it was at loose ends, and started doing more volunteering at that time. And in the early 2000s, started, spending some time helping. I'd take things home to edit and continued to write occasional reviews. And in 2002, at the end of 2002, I started just regularly volunteering to come over and help, thinking, not that I wanted to be editor. I think that was kind of a surprise. Because Alice at that point was ready to move on and actually have a life that wasn't bound to this quarterly schedule, which I knew pretty well from academics. There's this, your feeling of completion, and then you just kind of slack off, and then all of a sudden it comes roaring back at you, and you have to get back in the saddle. And there's this constant roller coaster of busyness and relaxing. But so it was in 2003, Alice relinquished editorship. Relinquished? Retired? I hate to say retired because she's
I'd like
really
to take over, Gail.
And without even thinking for a second, I said yes. And several friends were very concerned. Do you know what you're getting into? And I said, well, obviously not. But I jumped in. I felt like I was running to catch on a moving train because all the parts were going. And I've never been so overwhelmed in my life. Alice was sending me bios of all the reviewers, and at that time there was a stable of about 24 reviewers, and you had to know. It was a different system than the one Sarah's using, and I don't know if it's better or worse, but in those days, you kind of you personally knew the reviewers, you knew what their tastes were, and when the material came in, and at the time, cassettes were banned at that point, and they were CDs, and the CDs were rolling in, and the job of the editor was to quickly assess whether the CDs were worth reviewing. And Alice could do it in about 5 seconds. No, and then there was a box. But I felt like, oh no, I have to listen to every. So it took me forever to make it took me ages to decide, and then the next decision was to decide which reviewer to take it. So as you can imagine, the process was very lengthy. And then the other thing that happened, and I was very conscious of, keeping a balance of gender and race, and also, and I have an interest in early old-time music as recorded on 78s, and that cover over there was when I was editor. That is it's a David Lynch was a wonderful graphic artist who did the covers for a number of years, and I guess more than just the covers. He's the one that designed that particular logo, which is still on the magazine today. And so I like to get, find, and Bob Carlin wrote that article, which was fantastic, looked up family, surviving family members, and it was an extremely interesting band. Not only did they have the best name ever, it was Fisher Hindley and his Aristocratic Pigs, but they were from, and I had a kind of a 6 degrees of separation thing with him because he was from Anson County, Fisher Hindley. He was you can see him there with a banjo on the left and his wife with a rolling pin. But he had gone to college, like a lot of country people did in those days, who were, I guess they were sort of middle class, but kind of country. But he went to Trinity College, which later became Duke, as did my grandfather. So I got really excited and I tried to find out if there was a connection. There wasn't really, they were 8 years apart. But I found out some interesting stuff about college glee clubs, and they taught banjo. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about banjo style that may have come through these, a combination of a local two-finger style and then the instruction that they got to be a member of the Trinity College Glee Club, which my grandfather was too, but only he played mandolin. But there's a picture of him there in 1908, and then Fisher Hindley was like 1918. So anyway, that was fun to get articles that were kind of a passion. And then there was a whole series of history of the banjo, which I was really excited about. It ran through a couple of issues with Ulf Jagfors, the Swedish, I guess you would say, he's kind of a self-taught folklorist who visited West Africa many times and discovered the ancestor of the banjo. And that was kind of earth-shattering at the time, because to find that there were people in Senegal who played downstroke banjo and could recognize the clawhammer style as being a familiar thing. And then there was Peter Zago, who did a history of the banjo in Virginia, which was another two-part issue. And just a lot of local stuff. I was always interested in what local scenes were, and people who weren't famous or weren't performers, how did they participate and share the music? And I was really interested in jam groups, and we did some articles on specific long-running jams. There's the one that up in Philadelphia with
Bill and Fritzy.
yes,
Yeah, Wisdom.
Yes, Bill and Fritzy Wisdom, and that was an institution that went on for 20 years and had a nice article on them. But the main thing, I guess, was the technology that allowed for some changes, one of which was we didn't. The magazine was started out with just Alice and a team of volunteers, and then you got an assistant at some point. And when I came on, we had a superbly qualified assistant who was good at Catherine Meehan, who lives here in Durham, who not only was good at numbers and just really had a good sense of business, but as I've forgotten who said this about her, but she gave good phone.
Oh, yeah.
She could get money out of a stone, and that was always a big problem when you had advertisers that were negligent in paying their bills. Catherine could always sweet talk them into sending a check. So
I asked Catherine if she could come tonight because I thought it'd be fun, but she's at the beach.
well, yes. So, and then one other thing I wanted to talk about was that to me, the Old-Time Herald was the world, and but I knew what kind of an office it was, and we'll say just this, that there wasn't a lot of feng shui. I don't know if any of you have ever seen. And it was in Alice's, the first office was in Alice downstairs.
Yeah, in a little room.
And then moved up to the attic. And there were, what I remember was there were wires hanging, there were sockets and wires. It was like a chart for do not do this from the fire alarm. There were wires all over the floor that you tripped on, and sometimes you just throw a rug over them so that you could walk across the room. There were things hanging from the ceiling. There were, anyway, it was.
I think you're exaggerating.
I think it was pretty. Just be glad that there were no fires. And then when I became editor, it was in our daughter's childhood bedroom downstairs. And that was kind of a problem. The dogs would come in and out, and it took up a room in our already small house. And we wanted to, and Catherine particularly wanted to be more professional, so we moved to a place on, I guess it was on Old Chapel Hill Road, just around the corner from Alice's house. There's a big old gray house, it's still there. And for the first time, we had more than one room, and we even had a room to store the magazines. But it was that was the beginning of the financial tightening of that time, and we had to find something that was less expensive. And I guess through 2005, 2007, we were going into bi-monthly publication, and bi-monthly publication nearly drove us off the deep end, because you were preparing two at once, and this wasn't at all like the academic schedule where you have up and down. You just had nothing but busy, busy, busy. And we had, at that time, the office consisted of Catherine and me, and we always had an administrative assistant to do the subscription maintenance and the kind of the clerical stuff. We had several wonderful people who would work maybe a year or so. But there was always a third person. But most importantly, there was also Steve Terrell, who, because of more contemporary communication and computers, was able to work out of his house in Greensboro. And he started doing the layout, which was a huge, huge task. And so he took that on. And then eventually, when David Lynch retired to focus more on his graphic business, Steve Terrell started doing the covers as well. And I think one of the biggest things was the color inside the magazine. That was new too. We were able to,
Yeah.
and there's a beautiful example of that in Sarah's. It's an article on Howard Raines' art. It's really nice. And one more thing about color, though. When we first did it, we had several different printers. One of the printers was Barefoot Press. Maybe I shouldn't say their name. They were basically wonderful, but there were some odd things that happened. They were not used to a magazine. They printed posters for rock bands and brochures. So a magazine was a new thing for them. This was some friends of mine. In fact, we just saw Liz Stevens, who played with there's a Southwestern band. That was another part of the mission statement I wanted to go with, is people who were playing regional music to their area. And when we saw the cover, and we would go over to, we loved going over to Barefoot Press. We'd stop and get Krispy Kreme donut on the way.
Yeah.
And
It was in Raleigh.
It's in the Raleigh. It's in the same neighborhood. And so we look forward to it. Well, they bring this cover out, and it has people that I actually know on there. And Liz's hair was green, but it was too late. Like, this was the final copy. And so there wasn't anything they could do about it, they tried. But we just saw her last weekend at Rockbridge, and she was saying,
Tell
oh.
them about the John Ashby cover in the letter you got.
Oh, the letter. Oh, okay. Well, John Ashby was a fabulous fiddler from Fauquier County in Virginia. I think that's how you pronounce it. Who was kind of the king of Galax for a while. He and Benton Flippin would go toe to toe. And I was always interested in it because it was very old time, even though they had a bluegrass banjo player, but he was doing kind of a like under the radar repetitive role, and it was just really old time. And I thought he'd be really interesting because I knew his family had music way back when, and at least 3 or 4 generations. And so we ran an article on him, and we got a lot of nice photographs from, I think there was a lot of Chapel Hill people would go up to, they had picnics at their house, and maybe Bill Hicks, a lot of those people were good photographers. So we had a lot of wonderful pictures of these parties with the Bill Hicks and other Chapel Hill people playing on the porch at the Ashby family home place, which is where they had this big party and barbecue. And so I thought it was a really nice article. It dealt with where the music came from, and had some old pictures from the 20s of Ashby's grandfather playing with a band. And after the magazine came out, we got this postcard. Oh, I have to tell something else too, though. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but well, maybe I'll just tell what she said. I have received this magazine, and I would like to tell you that there are, and this is where it goes all caps, a lot of things not fit to print that I could tell you about John. And I have to say, they were divorced, and one of the reasons they were divorced was apparently he had a way with the ladies at Galax, and the motel up on they were coming in and out of the motel. Somehow she found out about this and sent this postcard, which is saved in a file somewhere.
Oh yeah, I should show the archives.
The archives, right. Well, then after Dwight retired, I decided I didn't want him to be retired and myself being stuck. It was bi-monthly at that time, and I was kind of ready to take a break. And I retired in 2008, and Sarah Bryan, who was already helping out with the editing and seeking new material.
Yeah.
Fit just fell right into it.
Yeah. And so, and Sarah was,
Why do you want to trade?
Sarah was supposed to be here tonight, but her grandmother died, and she had to go up to be with the family, so she couldn't come. But she she wrote a little something which I'll just kind of, if I can find it. Oh, where did I put it? Sorry, too much paper. Here, Gail, you want to tell a joke or something?
I thought might it be over here? Did I bury it?
I don't know.
Here it is.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we asked Sarah if she, we knew she had to go up to her family, and we asked her if she would just write a little something. So we asked her what the current subscription base is, and she said that it's around 1,800 now. And that includes folks in Canada and the British Isles, Australia, France, Spain, Japan, Sweden, Italy, and Mexico. As far as the health of the magazine goes, we're hanging on as always. And as always, we're very dependent on public contributions. The NEA gave us a 2-year grant for the Revival Generation Oral History Project, which has just wrapped up its first phase, and they're requesting funding for the next phase. And I asked her about stories that stand out, and she says, well, she's continually amazed by how many people tell us that they have every single issue we've ever published. Also, how fun it is when we hear from the relatives of historical musicians about whom we ran articles. Every couple of years, we hear from more Helton descendants. That's O.C. O.C. Helton? Is that her name?
Ernest and O.C. Helton.
Ernest and O.C. Helton from Western North Carolina. And there was an article about them. And their descendants, and that has happened before Sarah too. We'll get people writing, say, oh, you wrote this really nice article about my grandfather. I'd love to have some copies. She said, every couple of years we hear from more Helton descendants requesting copies of the issue with Bob Carlin's cover story. We always provide copies free to relatives who request them. When Bob wrote that story a few years later on the Elgin string band, I don't remember that one, did you? Who's the Elgin?
It was a very large string band from the Midwest. That's all I can remember. They
Okay.
might have had 20 different.
Yeah, so, which had dozens of members. It didn't occur to us to print extra copies for descendants, but so many descendants of band members, at least dozens, have contacted us over the last 10 years, and we've sent so many copies of that issue that it's just about exhausted. And she said, and you know, there were some there were some squabbles in the magazine. I mean, I remember in Bluegrass Unlimited when the Osborne brothers, a bluegrass band, first started using electric bass, it started this huge furor of letters, you know, pro-electric bass and con-electric bass, you know, shouldn't have electric bass in bluegrass. And there were things that happened in the Old-Time Herald. There was a very long-running controversy. Squabbles that have broken out have been some of the most important contributions to the old-time music world, that says Sarah. The famous Mac and Joe argument, that was Mac Benford of the Highwoods String Band and Joe Wilson of the National Council for the Traditional Arts, got into this, and it brought in a bunch of other people too, argument about who is traditional and who's not traditional, sort of. And it went on for, yes.
Either one of you young ladies or members of the audience can answer. Do you all contend that corporate America has ended or empowered bluegrass music for this musical role in our society?
If it's taken it over?
Has it ended or empowered?
Well, I can give you one example of where I think a corporate, and that's Merlefest. When Lowe's Corporation took over Merlefest, it changed a lot of things. The small musicians kind of got lost in the shuffle. They began not letting the families of traditional musicians go backstage, that sort of thing. They just started being more, and it was going after the donors, the big money and stuff like that, and catering to them. And it was becoming very problematic for us anyway. We didn't like it. So, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes I think it's bad. But so she was talking about that exit, that thing between Joe Wilson and Mac Benford, and a lot of other people that ran for several issues, and that all the archives for the Old-Time Herald are in the Wilson Library at the Southern Folklife Collection. So if anybody's interested, they could go over there and plow through them. I don't think they're organized yet. But no. We went over there. I went over there to take some pictures, just to see if I could find a few things. And there are boxes of stuff and these flats from the printer. They sent them all back, the photographs of the magazine and stuff like this. And Sarah addresses the whole issue of reviewers who, as one example, about 10 years ago, somebody got a mildly critical review. It was very complimentary of their playing, but it took slight issue with the historical premise behind the album about what fiddle and banjo music might have sounded like in the 19th century. And so they launched a massive online campaign to get the reviewer fired. I remember that.
That'll ruin his life.
It was kind of ugly. And Sarah says, apologies for not being able to join you, that she's gone up. So she's, I don't know how she does it, but she keeps it going.
Yes, it's a miracle. We're getting to the end of
Are you signaling us?
We have about 15 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Any questions? Yeah.
What are your favorite articles?
Oh, boy. I love the article on Etta Baker that Leslie Williams did quite a while back. And Etta Baker was a guitar player from near Morganton, North Carolina. Great guitar player. And Leslie Williams was a young intern at the folk the North Carolina Arts Council or something. Do you know what Leslie's doing these days? Anyway, she did a really nice article on Etta Baker. That was one of my favorites. I did like the whole discussion between Joe and Mac.
It was
and everybody.
entertaining.
Yeah, it was entertaining. It made me mad though, all the time. So, yeah. So, any other questions? Okay. Well, we said we'd play a little music. You want to? We got about 10 minutes. What shall we do?
I don't know. Maybe we could just do our first few tunes, and you could sing the Vulture.
Oh, the Vulture. Yeah. Yeah. I don't get a chance to sing the Vulture very often.
Now that we have a captive audience.
What do I do though?
This is from Moonshine Cave in the 70s. There was this reissue of 78s from the 20s, and one of them was Fiddlin John Carson and his daughter Rosalie. And a lot of these old records had skits, and they had characters that they would play. And Fiddlin John was the kind of irresponsible moonshiner, and Kate was always setting him straight. And she was very, her character, I don't know what she was really like, but she did a convincing job. And before she would, she'd usually say something like, "Give me, child, that red man tobacco, and I'll spit red and show you how to sing." And then she would,
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Intro. Okay. So I'm going to do, I really like doing this song because I never get a chance to do it because it's too long. But what's really interesting about this song is that it comes from a fellow by the name of D. Hicks, where it is. Is this your stuff? Oh, here we go. D. Hicks from the Cumberland Plateau of Tennessee was a banjo picker and a singer, and his wife was Delta Hicks. And Dee sang this song called The Vulture. And I heard him do it, and it was like, wow, what a great song. And he, so I called Bobby Fulcher, who had recorded D. Hicks singing the song. And we were talking about it, and he said that Duke, the library at Duke, had copies of the sheet music of The Vulture. So I went over there, and sure enough, there was some sheet music with this guy with lederhosen and standing on the cover of the sheet music, and his wife was out there hanging up clothes, and there was this vulture flopping around. And, and so I made a copy of it and took it home, but they also had something called the second class reader, or the first class reader. So I made some notes here. So, and it was, the first class reader was published in like 1840 something or other. And it got around, it was full of these sort of poems and recitations, and it went around, I guess, around the country, because D. Hicks was illiterate. He was functionally illiterate. He really hadn't attended much school at all. His father, though, went to school and had been in school. And my guess is that somewhere along the line, this first-class reader got around and people learned these recitations from it. So the first-class reader has printed, and that's in the Duke Library too, has printed out the whole Vulture song, and it's by Anonymous. And then the Hutchinson family, who were a family group of singers, took the song and put it to music, which is not the music that D. Hicks sings. But D. Hicks' version, I have to make a little cheat sheet because it's been a while since. I've been among these mighty Alps, I've wandered through their vales, I've heard the oldest mountaineers relate their dismal tales, sitting round the fire in their cottage homes when their daily work was o'er. Oh, they talked of those who had disappeared and ne'er returned no more. It was there I from a shepherd learned a narrative of fear, a tale to rend a parent's heart that mothers might not fear. Oh, the tears were standing in his eyes. Oh, his voice so low and hushed. Oh, a wiping all those tears away, he told his story thus. Among those might and craggy rocks the ravenous vulture dwells. He never fattens from a prey that from afar he smells. Oh, but patient waiting hours and hours on some lonely rock. Oh, then searching out some truant lamb, his victim from the flock. It was on one clear September morn, the sun was rolling high, when from my children on the green I heard a dismal cry. Oh, as if some awful deed was done, oh, a cry of grief and pain. Oh, a cry I humbly pray to God I ne'er may hear again. I hurried out to learn the cause, though overcome with fright. My children shrieked in wild dismay when from my frenzied sight, oh, I missed the youngest of my babes, the darling of my care. Oh, when something caught my searching eye, slow sailing through the air. Now what a hard spectacle, oh, to catch a mother's eye, to see her infant da 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 dum dum, to know, alas, with bursting heart and with a many grave, no human power could not avail this infant child to save. My infant reached his little hands, imploring unto me, while struggling in those raptor claws, so vainly to get free. I heard his agonizing cries, as loud and long he screamed. Oh, but then until upon that azure sky a lessening spot he seemed. The vulture flopped his sail like wings, as heavenly he flew, until upon that sun's broad face they came into my view. Oh, it's once I thought him swoop and turn as if for to light. It was all but a deluded thought, for they had vanished quite. Long years went by with the rolling times, this child was ne'er forgot, until a daring hunter climbed up to a lofty spot. And thereupon some craggy old rock, where the sun most ne'er had reached, lay the bones of an infant one, the elements had bleached. I hurried up those craggy rocks, I could not stay away. I knew that was my infant's bones just hastening to decay. Oh, the tattered garment was still remained, though tore to many a shred. Oh, the crimson cap that he wore that morn was still upon his head. The Vulture. Thank you. And we brought a book, a friend of ours who's an artist and also a musician.
Here's the baby with the crimson cap.
Wrote this book. She put together this book of that particular song, The Vulture, which we can pass it around if you want to look at it. Molly Stoughton.
The Vulture.
Yeah,
And she had heard it from D. Hicks, too.
yeah. So, well, thank you so much for coming. We had a few more tunes, but we're out of time, so.